There is no argument that video games are held on a high pedestal in today's technological era. As it has evolved from a very simplistic number and math genre to different complex storylines and genres, there is a video game out there for just about anybody. Video games have evolved into what they are today and are now essential and a necessary good for a multitude of reasons on both the consumer and the producer side. However, there may be some negative effects that impact people. For the majority, however, these would only happen if video game users play in excess and forget their sense of self discipline and responsibility. In this presentation, we will cover an array of information about video games to support this argument by asking questions like what are they, what is the history, what good and bad things do we get out of games, and finally, we will dive deeper into the picture of the specific impacts video games have left on our society. Video games are a now necessary invention for both consumers and producers, but do have some undesirable effects. For the majority, these only happen when video game users lack a sense of enough self discipline and responsibility. So, what exactly is a video game? As defined by the Merriam Webster Dictionary, video games are electronic games that allow users to interact with an interface to generate visual feedback on video display device. In shorter terms, they are electronic games you need specific electronic devices to view and listen to. Some common examples of video games are flash games on computers like those you could play on coolmat.com, games you could play on consoles like the PlayStation and Xbox series, such as Halo or Modern Warfare, or even gaming apps on your phone like Candy Crush Saga. Over the years, they have become more and more accessible and popular in society. Next, to dig into the background history of video games. Just like people, video games come in and fit into different generations and eras. The first generation of video games included notable platforms such as the Magnavox Odyssey and Coleco Telstar. The shift from very basic games like Pong, which are two sticks and a ball across a screen, to new games such as racing, fighting, and shooting began in this era. The following games were revolutionary in kicking off the birth of the video game frenzy, such as Tank, Space Wars, and Space Invaders. In the second generation, the revolutionary Atari 2600 console made its debut and dominated in the early part of the 80s, thanks to not many consoles being on the market. In 1983, the North American video game crash happened, causing a very low point in the console gaming history. However, the crash did not affect the PC gaming market all that much. The PC gaming market was different because PC gamers could bring their own spin to a game by changing the code of the game that they played. Also in the 90s, PC gamers were the only ones to have the ability to connect with other PCs, and this is a function that consoles did not have at the time, and we did not see until a lot later. In the third generation, games like Asteroids, Pac-Man, Super Mario Bros., and Tetris headline this era. Every time I go to a place that has arcade type games in them, they always have classic staples like Asteroids and Pac-Man. The four games that I talked about before are still well known today, and were even more popular when they were released. There have been countless times that Super Mario has been remastered, as well as put into different games, for example. In the fourth generation, the Super Nintendo and the Game Boy both came out. The Game Boy was the most popular console, and other consoles did not stand out as much. Sonic the Hedgehog, SimCity, and Final Fantasy were introduced during this time period and became somewhat popular, but would flourish later in this generation. In the fifth generation, the Game Boy console yet again headlined this era, such as the release of the Nintendo 64 along with the first PlayStation. The PC game market also boosted with the unveiling of Windows 95, as well as the overall expansion of the internet. The sixth generation came with the introduction of Dreamcast, the PlayStation 2, the first Xbox, and Nintendo GameCube. The introduction of all of these game systems gave users more of an option to what they wanted to play on. The systems all have their respective games that are able to be played. For example, If you had Halo for Xbox, you cannot play it on PlayStation and vice versa. Games that were popular during this time frame were Halo, the Grand Theft Auto series, and the Pokemon games. The seventh generation continued to build on the last, with Sony and Microsoft releasing their newest models of their respective gaming systems. The PlayStation 3 and the Xbox 360 caused a spike in the popularity of gaming because of the updates of the gaming systems. There were also games that came out for these systems that were not available for play on the PS2 or the Xbox. This brings us to present day, where there are so many different ways to play video games. The most popular gaming systems today are the PlayStation 4, Xbox One, and the Wii U. The PlayStation 4 and Xbox One has a function that allows you to play with players from other consoles. So you can play with, if you have friends that have PlayStation 4 and you have an Xbox One, you can play with them across various different games. PC gaming has also rose to the top of the charts as the most competitive way to play. Moving on, we'll be looking at the pros of video games first. These pros are only applicable to consumers and the good effects that come with video games. First, video games have the power to teach people important life skills depending on each game and their challenges. For multiplayer co-op games, you need to learn a good sense of sociability, teamwork, good sportsmanship, and patience in order to be successful at whatever video game you are playing. Next, scientific research published by Science Daily on June 22nd, 2017, shows that video games are able to shape our brains and behaviors. More specifically, the brain regions that are responsible for attention and visuospatial skills to train efficiency as video games trigger other brain regions associated with reward system. Next, video games have turned into a newer medium for physical therapy and exercise as game developers create new games that might not be handheld. For example, Wii Fit was created by Nintendo that encouraged you to get off the couch and into the game with the Wii Balance Board. It is able to sense your weight and balance while the game records your data. Just Dance, a multi-console series game, is used by many hospitals as a form of physical therapy and exercise. Dance Dance Revolution is both an arcade game and a home console game that is similar to Just Dance, and not our only video games used to physical therapy, but for psychiatric therapy as well. In an article published by Frontiers in Psychiatry on January 22nd, 2018, it has been researched by a medical team that games can be a useful tool in psychotherapy for assessment, building rapport, and providing social skills training. Gaming communities have united around real-world problems in a therapeutic and philanthropic way, but also as an ultimate means of community and learning. Now, despite there being a numerous amount of pros with video games, there's always some sort of list of cons. However, with video games, the cons are very limited and is arguably only something that comes when you play and possibly abuse video games. The first con is that developing a video game addiction, and that comes from or with symptoms such as obesity, sleep loss, and even aggression. Frontiers in Psychology conducted a research study in 2017 that came to the conclusion that because of the same reward system that allows us to learn in our brains that wants more and more, this gives the potential risk of video game addiction. In this same study, it was concluded that the effects of video games do not always translate to real-life changes. More specifically, aggression in recent years has begun being debunked by researchers. The University of York conducted a study on January of 2018, and they found that no evidence supporting that video games makes people more violent. Hopefully more research can be conducted later to debunk video game addiction, but right now it is not guaranteed that you will develop this disorder. It is easier to avoid this if you play with responsibility while handling everything else in your life that includes relationships, education, and your job duties. The one con that can't necessarily be debunked is that video games are an enabler for sexism against women because of the role women have played in video games. Looking back at older games, it's a rare occurrence to find women playing an important, strong, and independent role. One of the earliest portrayals of women in video games is Princess Peach in the Mario Bros. Series, where repeatedly over the years she is kidnapped every time and needs Mario to save her. This is only one example. Women are also over-sexualized, as seen in the image on the left from Grand Theft Auto 5. The over-sexualization of women in video games is something that has been a continuous problem, but video games continue to do so because these women are directly linked with their profiting. In recent years, however, video game developers have begun challenging the role that women play in video games. On the right, Ellie, a 14-year-old among the apocalypse in The Last of Us, that is by Joel's side throughout the story. Her character development is amazing, and looking at how she is still only a child but extremely mature, she isn't sexualized at all whatsoever. She's a child that shows how strong girls can be, and this is something we can hopefully to see more of in the future. So all in all, we can observe the huge impact that video games have made onto our current society. Video games connect people globally. Thanks to the internet and cooperative games, we can meet people from all over the world and play against each other and with each other for the same reason, to have fun. Whether this is randomized or asking somebody on your friends list to play a game with you, we are able to connect with people that aren't near us over Wi-Fi. Because we're able to connect people globally, this gives us the ability to foster friendships over a mutual interest. This doesn't have to be over an internet connection though, because you still have the ability to invite somebody over and give them another controller so you can play together. Even if you don't play together, you can still have great friendship over video games with how much you like talking to them and discussing the ins and outs of games. With the popularity of game series, there are now trademarked franchises like Mario Bros. And Pokemon. With these franchises, you can always indulge into your favorite games and from generation to generation as you grow with veteran players and new players. The video game industry is now an $18.4 billion industry. The industry has grown to such an extent that it is now a major employer and provides a great opportunity for expressing creativity. And now we have our works cited. And the workload slide. Thank you for listening.